Good morning and hello to everyone from Oslo. Welcome to this second webinar in the German-Norwegian Energy Dialogue webinar series on bilateral business opportunities in the hydrogen value chain. My name is Hanne-Marit Strand, and together with my colleague Torstein I will guide you through the webinar today. The Energy Dialogue is planned together with our partners, the German Embassy in Oslo, the Norwegian Embassy in Berlin, and Innovation Norway in Germany and Norway. The event is further supported by our partners, Equinor, RW Renewables, Statnett, Tennet, Statkraft, DNV, Agder Energi, and Hydro. This webinar will present concrete initiatives on hydrogen production and value chain development with a bilateral perspective. We will continue the discussions from yesterday's webinar on how to set up the relevant infrastructure for hydrogen and how increased bilateral hydrogen cooperation can provide new business opportunities for both Norwegian and German stakeholders. Today's webinar is one of several activities that we as a bilateral Chamber of Commerce organize to enable more bilateral cooperation on hydrogen. In particular, we would like to mention shortly that we have established a German-Norwegian working group on hydrogen. And this serves as a platform and network to enable further cooperation between the companies from both countries. Before we begin this session, my colleague Torstein will give you some practical information.
Thanks a lot, Hanne-Marit. And as you said, I will provide some practical information before we begin today's session. First of all, we will be recording this webinar and we will share it with you afterwards. And we will also share the slides from the presentations with you. Now, we have already received some questions in advance from the audience, but you may also pose questions in the chat bar on the right side on your screen. And we will follow the chat throughout the day and try to include the questions in the discussion. Today, we will structure the webinar as follows. We will begin with a keynote presentation on how best to go forward to establish a European infrastructure for hydrogen. We will then continue with some short pitches from 3 companies with concrete proposals on how they can contribute to building up the hydrogen value chain in Germany and Norway, as well as to open up for cross-border exchange of hydrogen. After that, we will round off today's session with a discussion on the topics covered during the day. But now it's time for our first speaker of the day and the keynote presentation. We are very happy to welcome Dr. Matthias Deutsch, who is Senior Associate at Agora Energiewende. Agora is an independent think tank dedicated to solving the climate crisis. And at Agora, Matthias Deutsch concentrates his work on power and sector coupling, as well as energy storage. And today he will present some takeaways from some of the research that Agora has conducted on how a European infrastructure for hydrogen should be developed and how hydrogen fits into the overall framework to achieve zero emissions. So Mr. Deutsch, please feel free to begin when you're ready, and we're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. If you can now see a couple of mushrooms, then we are good to go. Could you just confirm?
Can see your mushrooms.
Excellent.
Very
thank
well.
you. Thank you for the mushroom confirmation. That's the very first important step. So thank you very much for having me here. Again, let me start with one thought on Agora. Again, we have grown considerably. So now we are more than 80 experts. And yes, we are independent, non-partisan. And we do this mainly through philanthropic foundations and their funding. And therefore, we try to make kind of independent contribution to discussions. And let me look back some days. What you saw in the news was we fought pretty much something big, which was the IEA presenting its net zero scenario. And this is just underlining that the race to net zero and climate neutrality is on. And on the left side, you can see this is somebody else's interpretation from a publication on what the IEA has delivered. And this is just a little reminder, we are now in the process of phasing out fossils. So this is a picture on showing where gas needs to go in the future. The upper part is something like the BP business as usual scenario. And then the blue in the middle one going down is the IEA net zero scenario, showing you, okay, we are now approaching scenarios by the IPCC. And that's kind of the challenge. And as another contribution in the more German context, we as Agora, we have published a climate neutral Germany 2045 scenario some weeks ago, which coincides with activities by the German government in focusing on 2045. And I brought this to you to show that, yes, emissions need to go down, but there's also another implication. It's we will need molecules, namely hydrogen and derived products. And now a scenario has hydrogen and power to liquid, PTL, amounting to a total of 422 terawatt hours in 2045. And 2/3 of this, of the hydrogen, will need to be imported, and then in addition to the PTL, which is also imported in the scenario. So essentially, Germany, if it takes its decarbonization challenge seriously, will need to import considerable amounts of molecules. And this is not an outlier. You can find other scenarios, like 95% reduction scenarios, which show, yes, there will be import needs. Now, I'm bringing this to start our focus here today with the question, what do we need all those molecules for? And here we want to be pretty clear. This is about specific applications within sectors. It's not a sector as such. It's about applications. And I show you a chart that we have kind of developed to show this. Which are those applications that really need green molecules to become climate neutral? And you see the sectors on the x-axis, if you wish, industry, transport, power, buildings. And then we have said some of those applications needing molecules are rather uncontroversial, and others are controversial, and some, in our understanding, are really a bad idea. For example, when you look at low temperature heat, and low temperature heat is actually needed also in industry, but in particular in large volumes in buildings, individual buildings, we think that's a bad idea to talk about molecules at that, for those applications. Same thing for passenger cars or light-duty vehicles. Now, if we want to move forward with a hydrogen economy, a decarbonized one, we should focus on those parts that are least controversial and uncontroversial. So let's start with industry. It is uncontroversial and very much acknowledged that we need reaction agents and feedstock. And then there's some other stuff in transport, in the power sector, and in buildings. Now, since industry has a particular challenge, because in many respects it is under intense global competition, and we can see global competition gaining speed in Asia, in America, we need to position European industry in a way that it is actually able to compete in the race to net zero. And therefore, we have said we should really focus on the uncontroversial molecules needed in industry first. And that was our starting point to design what we call our no regret hydrogen project. And I brought you some slides on this today. So we commissioned Avery Management Consulting to study with the underlying question, what's the most cost-effective way to deliver hydrogen to the centers of industrial demand in Europe? So this is the focus. And what Avery did was they mapped industrial demand from steel, ammonia, refineries, and chemical plants. Then they mapped supply with the best future levelized cost of clean hydrogen. I'm going to talk a bit more on that. And then they model least cost delivery systems. And that includes storage sites, salt caverns, basically. This is all in there. And the result is what we call no regret pipeline corridors as early opportunities. And that is key to understanding this contribution from our side. We don't deliver the big picture for the future of the hydrogen system all across Europe. The question is, where do we start? Where is the agreement for an early start? And you can find the publication, a data appendix a slide deck in the webinar if you click on the slides later here. Now let me see what we did first. The demand side. Steel, ammonia refineries and chemical plants are widely distributed across Europe. And if you look at the map, the numbers in the hexagons are important. Some hexagons are dark, some are rather in a lighter shade. The dark ones have the heavy demand. This is in terawatt hours per year. It's a projection for 2050, but even for 2030, and we have covered 2030 to 2050, the picture doesn't change much. There's a phase-in of steel and direct reduced iron, steel production, and a phase out of refineries. That's a strong assumption, I have to admit. But overall, the picture is the same. And you see there is a difference in demand by orders of magnitude. There's below 1 terawatt hour a year, let's say rather in the south, and then there's up to 10 to 20 terawatt hours per year in the north, especially, and it's not a surprise, of course, this area between Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, France, you see 24 and 27 terawatt hours. I mean, large clusters of chemical installation and steel plants. And of course, also some clusters in Eastern Europe and along the Mediterranean. Now, this is our starting point. Where is the uncontroversial, no regret industrial demand? And then we mapped potential supply. And we mapped supply in 2 scenarios. I mean, this is just a more schematic graph on the left side showing that, yes, we do know that there is and there will be wind and sun. And so this, we'll need to tap this. It's more wind in the north and more sun in the south, and then some mixes in the middle. And that's an interesting discussion of where do hybrid solar and wind mixes make most sense. That may change over time, of course. And then we had 2 scenarios in our study. One we call blue-green. It's renewable hydrogen and hydrogen based on fossil fuels with carbon capture, what we call SMR-CCS. And that's only admitted in the Netherlands, Norway, and the UK. And then we have another fast green scenario. There's no SMR-CCS in there. And there's a very aggressive cost reduction in electrolyzer cost. And we think that is actually can be defended on the grounds that if the EU succeeds with its very ambitious target of 40 gigawatt hours within Europe, electrolyzer deployment by 2030, and even some more around Europe, then it's okay to make this aggressive cost reduction in the fast green scenario. When we look at what happens then, when we look at the least cost hydrogen, we got the 2 scenarios. To the left, you see blue-green, and to the right, you see the fast green outcome. So in the left, and that's, again, no surprise, you see some SMR CCS in Norway, UK, Netherlands. That's this kind of lavender shade, SMR CCS, as opposed to the blue, which represents wind. And those are the best levelized cost of hydrogen by 2030, based on all the assumptions that are taken here. And in the long run, we see renewables becoming the least cost contribution in terms of hydrogen LCOH. However, I mean, there is a certain time during which blue hydrogen can contribute to a decarbonization and remains a viable investment. And the question, of course, is then how long is it viable? If you can anticipate that costs for green hydrogen are coming down, when do you want to invest today or in the next some years if you can anticipate the stronger and increasing competition from green hydrogen? Very important question for anybody, I think, doing investments into this, because this may then shorten the investment window and the window of opportunity for fossil-based hydrogen with carbon capture. The key point here is that we will need ambitious policy to drive down the cost of renewable hydrogen, because any kind of cost reduction will not come by itself. What we have learned from solar photovoltaics is that there's a big contribution from just deploying PV and then learning by doing. And if we expect countries to deploy electrolyzers, then we can also anticipate costs coming down through scaling and learning. But this really needs an incentive to deploy electrolyzers in the first place. And that's the entire discussion about how do we incentivize the green hydrogen, which comes at a cost premium today. So there is a cost gap to be filled and overcome today. And at Agora, we're actually working on this, and we plan to come out with a publication on incentives, support instruments for green hydrogen by early July. But let me now give you our final picture. And this is a very specific methodology, the way we we modeled, or the way we understood what we call no regret corridors, because we said we want to check how robust the results for certain least cost pipeline systems are. And the assumption was that they have to show up in all our scenarios for 2030 and for 2050. So both in the blue-green and the fast-green scenario. And that's not the case for each pipeline, I can tell you. So what we derived here is where to start. And we derived our early no-regret investment opportunities for hydrogen pipelines based on industrial demand. So remember, this is only industrial demand as defined here. And you see the clusters, and you see, it's hard to see, but there's a map of Europe behind this. And in the north for 2050, you see kind of least cost is wind, least cost in the south is solar, and some hybrid in the middle, mix of wind and solar, to deliver the least cost hydrogen. And I mean, remember, for Germany, we are still assuming here there will need to be imports, because even though the costs may be very low under those assumptions, there is, of course, competition with direct electrification. We need a lot of renewable electricity first to directly electrify, and then we talk about molecules. Now here you can see those no-regret corridors, and they are close to those very large clusters with the 27 or 24 terawatt hours of industrial demand. Those are the connections that come out of this modeling exercise. And this is the starting point. If you add additional demand from the power sector, very important for backing up renewables and for backing up district heat systems in the future. If you add aviation and shipping, this will strengthen the case for a larger and more expansive network of hydrogen pipelines. And so we're not saying this is the final picture, by no means. This is the starting point. And we'll see what the final hydrogen grid over Europe will look like. It's most likely smaller than what we know from the natural gas era that's now going to finish soon. And we should be sure that we don't oversize our hydrogen infrastructure based on misleading assumptions, because we should try to electrify first where it's possible. And then when we touch the limits, then we need molecules. And that's what we need to plan for with our infrastructure. So in a nutshell, we think, so those what some people call hard-to-abate industrial application and sectors represent a major area of hydrogen demand in the future, because they don't have much alternative or no alternative at all. And there we see an investment window for fossil-based hydrogen with carbon capture. But in the long run, it's renewable hydrogen will be more cost competitive. And based on this, we have identified our kind of robust no-regret corridors as the starting point for early investment opportunities. Thank you very, very much for listening. If you're interested, you'll be able to kind of download some of the latest studies. This study, our Climate Neutral Germany study, and some other work on breakthrough strategies for industry in Europe. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deutsch. You will also join us later in the discussion. So if anyone in the audience has questions, don't hesitate to send them in the chat, and we will try to get them answered later on. Now we continue with some projects that are relevant in a German-Norwegian perspective. We will begin with Randi Mette Hegseth from Equinor. She is leading activities in Northwest Europe and has worked 15 years at Equinor and has previously also held senior positions within petroleum technology and business development. Randi Mette, we look forward to hear your presentation on the H2Tomorrow project. Welcome.
So there's no presentation, but I will show a video in a few minutes. But first, some introduction. So Equinor planned to become carbon neutral by 2050. And to accelerate the energy transformation, we are involved in several renewable wind projects, CCS projects, and both green and blue hydrogen projects. Today, I will talk about the H2Tomorrow Steel project, which is a collaboration between Equinor, ThyssenKrupp, and Open Grid Europe and ThyssenGas. Steel industry needs to decarbonize to meet the climate targets, and ThyssenKrupp is one of the world's largest steel producer, and their plant in Duisburg in Germany produces 11 million tons of steel per year. And to make this steel, they use coal as a reduction agent in the blast furnace. So this plant alone emits 20 million tons of CO2 per year. This is the same as 35% of all emissions in Norway, and this is just from one plant. But they have a vision to reduce the emission 30% by 2030 and become carbon neutral by 2050. And there is this innovative alternative steel making method that produces steel without coal. It's called a direct reduction plant and can use hydrogen as a reduction agent and thereby avoid any emissions. So ThyssenKrupp is planning a stepwise transition from coal to hydrogen by installing these units. So where do we come in? We have now concluded the feasibility study and how to supply large amount of hydrogen to the steel mill. Equinor is responsible for producing hydrogen in Eemshaven and the sequestration of the CO2. Several potential CO2 storage sites have been evaluated, like the Norwegian Northern Light project and Portos project in the Netherlands. Carbon capture offshore storage is a well-proven technology that has been used offshore of Norway for more than 24 years. It is closely monitored and no leaks have been detected. Through several mapping initiatives around the North Sea, both by industry, regulators and research institutes, signals that storage capacity will not be a limitation for development of CCS in Northwest Europe. So we produce the hydrogen and take care of the CO2, while Open Grid Europe and ThyssenKrupp is transporting the hydrogen by converting existing gas pipeline and also building a new 40-kilometer connection to the steel mill. The project partners has demonstrated that hydrogen can be produced in large quantities and at very competitive prices. Such large volume cannot be provided by green hydrogen alone in this period. The feasibility study also concludes that the political and regulatory framework in Germany and the EU needs to be clarified. The main issues here are the conversion of the natural gas pipeline to hydrogen pipeline and the transport of hydrogen independently of the production technology. In addition, coordination between the Netherlands and Germany on the network expansion and cross-country transport agreements are necessary. At the EU level, we need a uniform and systematic approach to hydrogen of all production technology, taking into account the respective CO2 footprint. So now we will show a 4-minute video with some more details about the project.
The German industrial sector is the largest in Europe and makes up more than a quarter of the country's total GDP. However, its industries are based on energy and resource-intensive production processes that are currently responsible for more than 20% of Germany's CO2 emissions. For Germany to reach its target of being carbon neutral by 2050, alternative sources of energy are needed to fuel its industries. Blue hydrogen is one of those alternatives, as it can replace the direct use of carbon-emitting fuels such as coal, oil or natural gas. It is a reliable energy to kickstart decarbonisation, as it is competitively priced for a low-carbon fuel and is continuously available in the large volumes required to support industrial needs. With a production capacity of up to 2,700 megawatts, the H2Morrow project aims to supply blue hydrogen to Germany and the Netherlands starting in 2027. For this to happen, natural gas from Norway will be transported via existing pipelines to a hydrogen production site on the North Sea coast that will reform the gas into hydrogen. The carbon footprint of the process will be reduced by 95%, as the CO2 from the reformer will be captured and transported to an offshore reservoir in the North Sea, where it will be stored a few thousand meters below the seabed. This type of storage technology has been in operation for over 20 years, and deposits are closely monitored to ensure safe and permanent storage of the CO2. From the production site, hydrogen will primarily be distributed via repurposed gas pipelines to industrial partners. The biggest partner is ThyssenKrupp Steel Europe, which operates the largest German steel mill from a site at Duisburg. The project is designed to deliver enough hydrogen to the steel mill to produce up to 7 million metric tons of climate-neutral steel per year, reducing CO2 emissions by up to 11 million tons at the plant, and helping reach the company's climate targets. The use of blue hydrogen is an effective way to establish hydrogen transport and distribution networks and transition to a clean hydrogen economy. The capturing of CO2 will accelerate the decarbonisation of the industrial sector, whilst technologies for green hydrogen, produced using renewable energy sources, are further developed, made more cost-effective and able to scale to the levels required by heavy industries. The success of the H2Morrow initiative is dependent on effective partnerships with local companies and on appropriate European and national policies and regulatory frameworks, which provide the basis for further investment. This cross-sector collaboration can radically transform centuries-old industries to make them fit for a carbon-neutral economy.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. We will come back to you shortly after the next two presentations for a short discussion round. Next up now is Torstein Melhus, who is Head of Business Development on Hydrogen and Ammonia at Agder Energi. He has more than 20 years of experience from industry, both as site manager, business development manager, chairman, and board member in several companies. Torstein, you will talk about the potential for hydrogen production in southern Norway and the export possibilities to Germany. Welcome, Torstein.
Thank you. Green hydrogen from Norway, I'll talk a bit about that. Equinor is focusing on blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, but I hope I could leave some kind of picture that Norway also represents a large opportunity for export of green hydrogen to Europe. Agder Energi, this is Agder Energi in a short picture, about 14 billion in turnover, about 900 employees, 22,000 kilometers of grid, and 49 power stations in the rivers. We have dams, grid, and user customer. And our DNA is electrons, but we think our DNA also would be suitable to produce molecules from our hydropower. And Agder Energi is located on the south coast of Norway, closest to Europe of our regions. We have a surplus of renewable power in the region, hydropower. We have a strong grid, closeness to Europe, and we have good harbor facilities. So we have some prerequisites that should favor us for production, and it's not in any way talking down other areas of Norway. And we have available low-cost renewable hydropower. That's a cost enabler for producing hydrogen. And we could utilize that to produce molecule, as said. And critical here and important is that the hydropower is available 8,760 hours a year. The best wind estimates is approximately 4,000 hours, meaning that we could double the amount of kilos delivered by installed megawatts or effect. We think this is a very important issue here. We have access to power grid, high available capacity. We have long-term PPAs at competitive price levels for the power. We have available areas for production facilities nearby harbors, and we have a short distance to Germany and Europe. And we are working on a possible scaling plan to establish a 120 megawatt facility in 2025, currently working on the feasibility studies, and increase that in some kind of steps toward a gigawatt in 2030, meaning it would be a substantial production and supply unit. We have to transport the hydrogen to Europe, and as the former slide here, it's a close distance. Equinor is working on pipelines from the west coast of blue hydrogen. There's still no availability of pipelines for green hydrogen from our region. Probably there will be in the future, but at short term, we see that we have to transform the hydrogen to liquid ammonia for transport and available shipping routes to Europe. This is similar to what they are doing in Australia, Chile, Africa, other continents, that liquid ammonia is a commodity. It's available ships to transport it. And another issue with transforming the hydrogen to ammonia is that ammonia is a bet as ship fuel in traditional combustion engines, both two-stroke and four-stroke. And engine producers are now working to get forward machinery, propulsion machinery, and utility gensets for ammonia. We are working very closely with different engine producers, and this we think is a prosperous and enormous market when also you have solved the security issues with ammonia. And then also liquid ammonia for storage and transportation. Transforming the hydrogen to ammonia, store it on shore at the harbor, get it on a ship, and send it to Europe, we think is today the cheapest and most available way to transport it. The obstacle is that it needs to be cracked to ammonia in port or at end customer, which takes local electricity, needs to be green electricity, and that is not, well, it's not a good solution to use local electricity. But we think anyway it's the best. But liquid hydrogen is an option when ships are available. Currently, there's only one ship. We hope that liquid hydrogen ships will come forward. We also have been looking into LOHC, which I think is Hydrogenious coming after me now. That is definitely a genius solution, which we are looking into. And also we could have carbon capture and produce e-fuel. We have emissions from industrial processes. And long term, we expect H2 pipelines between Norway and the South Europe, and that will dramatically reduce the cost of transport. So kind of key takeaways. The most important issue, I think, is that we are able to produce 8,000 hours a year, at least, which will maximize the yearly tons. We have fairly priced long-term PPAs. We are able to perform rapid deployment with hydropower in place. We don't have to build anything. The grid is there, the hydropower is there, the locations are there. We are good to go. There are available ships and sailing routes for liquid ammonia with short distances to Germany. So what we see now, just to close this, we want to start production in Norway from hydropower of green hydrogen and ammonia. There are available ships to ship it to Germany. And what we hope is that the reception and incoming logistics in European harbors is available so that when the ships come, Europe and Germany is prepared to receive the ammonia, crack it, store it, and distribute it further into Germany. I think kind of the easy part here is the production side. What I have discovered with meetings with German companies is that it's still not available, the incoming logistics. So what we'd like to do is to participate in cross-border pilot projects to speed up supplies of green hydrogen from Norway to Germany. And we see that Norway represents an opportunity for Germany to establish import lines for green hydrogen. As said, you don't have to wait for anything to be built. The power is in place, the grid is in place, it's ready to go. So I hope we would get into more and good cooperations with German actors and harbors and parties. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Torstein. And we move on to our third speaker in this session. That is provided by Ms. Siying Huang, who is Senior Business Development Manager at Hydrogenious LOHC Technologies. Ms. Huang joined the company in 2018 and is focusing on project development in the European and Asian markets. And she'll tell us more about their solution for transport of hydrogen, both at scale and over long distances. So Ms. Huang, are you there?
Yes, hello. So let me try to share my screen now. So thank you for waiting, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Siying Huang. I'm working at Hydrogenious LOHC Technologies. So as you can already read from the name of the company, we are really focused on the commercialization and product development of the LOHC technologies. And you can see an overview about our company. The company was established in 2013, so about 8 years ago, by our CEO and his 3 professors at the University Erlangen-Nuremberg. And by today, we have more than 100 employees already, and have filed more than 40 patent families worldwide in the field of LOHC technologies. And we have managed to demonstrate and to prove that the LOHC technology works in the last few years in the way of implementing about 10 small-scale systems. And today we are working on the large-scale, industrial-scale systems. So I will come to that later. And on the bottom of the slide, you can see that we have on the left side, you can see that we have different shareholders to support us to promote the technology. And we have on the right side, different technology partners who are developing together with us different components and making technology improvements for the LOHC applications. Here you can see that how the LOHC technology works. The idea is the technology itself is based on 2 chemical processes. The first one is called hydrogenation. So once the hydrogen is produced, no matter by, let's say, coming out from steam reformer or coming out from electrolysis, it can be put into our storage unit. Which in this unit, the hydrogenation process takes place. And after the process, we combine the molecules, the hydrogen molecules, with the molecules of the carrier. And what we get as product after the process is called, it's the loaded LOHC carrier. And the loaded carriers can be transported by truck, by train, by ships to different hydrogen off-takers. And at the off-taker side, we have our second system, or where the dehydrogenation process takes place. After this process, we separate the hydrogen molecules from the molecules of the carrier, and the hydrogen can be used again for different industrial applications, for steel production, for refineries, for example. And of course, it can be used for in the mobility segment. So it can be used, the hydrogen can be fed into large fueling stations, for example, for heavy-duty vehicles. And in the meanwhile, we are also developing our second dehydrogenation systems, which can be installed directly on a vessel, for example. And on the vessel, the hydrogen will be released directly from the release unit and from the carrier, and then fed into, for example, fuel cell, and to provide power for the vessels. And the other product from the dehydrogenation process, which is the carrier itself, can be brought back to the production site and be reused for up to several hundred times. So today I would like to introduce one of the projects that we are now developing together with our partners in Verbund, Siemens, and Bayern Oil. The project is called Blue Danube. So the basic idea is to produce green hydrogen in Eastern Europe, in Romania, for example, using wind power and solar power, and then store the hydrogen into the LHC carrier, and then transport the LHC carrier along the river Danube to different off-takers along the rivers. So like off-takers in Austria, or off-takers in Bayern, like refineries, like large fueling stations, like steel producers, etc. And in this project, we are going to, as I mentioned, we are going to transport the LHC material in rivers. So we are going to use the inland ships, like what you can see at the very bottom of the slide. So on slide 5, we are going to use barges and with push boats to transport the LHC material. And this again will shows that the LHC technology can really use existing infrastructure to transport large volume of hydrogen without any, let's say, any large investment for new infrastructure. And for this project, Blue Danube, the consulting company Roland Berger has also done a feasibility study and compared different transport technologies. And you can see that on the left side, the graphic, and on the graphics on the right side, you can see that no matter in regards of the systems, in regards of the conversion and reconversion processes, the LHC technologies shows has easier implementation, has better cost efficiency compared with other technologies, with other processes. And then in terms of the transportation in between from harbor to harbor, for example, using ship transportation based on existing inland shipping infrastructure, the LHC technology has also large advantages and compared with railway or truck or pipeline. In the meanwhile, we are also working on other projects. These are all, let's say, located in different regions, from Germany to the Netherlands, from Spain to Germany, and even from Middle East to Europe. And our idea is really to bring green hydrogen from locations where the green hydrogen can be produced at very low cost, and to locations where the demand for green hydrogen is very high and the production cost is very high, and also the production capacity is limited. And of course, Norway as a neighbor country for us is also a very interesting market that we are looking into. And at the moment, we are also involved in one project in Norway. It's called HyFuel. In this project, the idea is to produce green hydrogen on the west coast of Norway, and then store it into our LHC material. And the LHC material will be used for the maritime industry. And for the long term, of course, we can also imagine to produce green hydrogen in Norway and then store the green hydrogen in the LHC material, and then bring the LHC material to different off-takers in other countries, like in Germany or in the Netherlands, and so on. So that's our target in our target picture, and really look forward to further discussions with interesting parties, and together to set up a global hydrogen infrastructure based on LHC technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Huang, for this very nice introduction to your company and to your solutions. now we have time for a few questions, and I see that there have come some questions in the chat bar. So, Hanne-Marit.
Yes, maybe the first question for Randi Mette from Equinor. What is the intended duration of the blue hydrogen supply for ThyssenKrupp's plant? And are there specific plans to switch to green hydrogen later?
If you look at the hydrogen ambition level, it's very high. So that's why we need all decarbonization tools and colors of hydrogen to meet these ambitions. For instance, if you look at the EU hydrogen strategy, it would account for 13 to 40% of the final energy mix in 2050. And if all of that has to come from green hydrogen, 80% of all the power today has to be developed on wind alone to feed the electrolyzers. So the barriers is that we have to have all production technology through a transition phase. And you could have some green already now, but you don't have the volume needed. So you need to have a transition period with the blue. And for instance, the carbon contract for difference pilot currently in Germany also needs to be made available for all types of hydrogen to kickstart the economy. So transitional technologies are needed. So let what is good not be the enemy of the perfect. So if you're going to have the perfect already from day one, I'm worried the transformation will be slow, but we have the solution for a certain time period. But we all think that eventually it will become green towards 2050.
Thank you for that. I think we could take also a question for Torstein Melhus from Agder Energi. This comes from the company Torstein AS, and it's how much volume of maritime vessel hydrogen transport requirements do you expect within the next years from Norway to Germany?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it's pending on how many is going in. Let's say that you have probably towards 2035, I don't know, 2-3 gigawatts installed. How much is that in ammonia? Let's say 800,000 tons. 2,500, no, times 3, 2.5 million tons of green ammonia should be more or less if you have 3 gigawatts. I think, don't ask me to do that in hydrogen as well. I think that is pretty right. If you have 120 megawatt, then you have 100,000 tons. 100,000 tons per year. So I guess towards 2035, yeah, 2.5 million tons, give or take. This is just a guesstimate. But I mean, if you look at the commodity today with gray ammonia, large amount is transported by vessels. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Let's continue with you, Torstein. We just got a question on acceptance issues, considering that there is a lot of industry coming in Norway, and there might be competition between the different industries. Have you made any thoughts on how this will become accepted among the population in southern Norway?
I guess then the question is who gets the power? Yeah. Is that, if I understand the question correct? Well, it's kind of the one who orders the power gets the power. And if you look at it the other way, is then the conflict of interest, the ammonia as such. I I think this will be one of the main production elements in Norway, to use the hydropower also for molecules. And then I guess it's just going to see what happens. I cannot control that. I say that we are betting on hydrogen and ammonia, and also we have a large battery factory coming up in Morrow Batteries, which Agder Energi is involved in. And definitely there will be a fight for the power, I guess, I hope, since we are a utility company.
Yeah, that sounds like a proper answer. I'd like to follow up with Siying, Huang. Have you made any thoughts on costs? How do you see the costs with LOHC compared to, let's say, ammonia?
I mean, if we are really talking about transporting hydrogen, so if we really consider two processes for both technologies, one is the conversion process, for ammonia is the production process, and for us is the hydrogenation process, and also considering the reconversion processes, like for ammonia would be the cracking process, for LOHC would be the dehydrogenation process at the end. Then we would say the LOHC technology will be will have better cost efficiency, because the dehydrogenation process is already much more, let's say, developed than the cracking process. And of course, at the end, these two technology, I think the LOHC technology will has, let's say, slightly better cost efficiency than ammonia. But at the end, it's not only about the cost issue, but also like other aspects, the acceptance, like safety issue, like building the infrastructure and building really ammonia plants in, or ammonia bunkering systems in harbor where in regions which is very populated. And I think all these issues, these are cannot be reflected directly from the cost, from the numbers, and that's always something we need to consider as well. And so at the end, I think it will be let's say a matrix of different aspects which will need to be considered, and not only about cost.
Thanks a lot. And one follow-up question for Randi. I would like to pick up on something that Matthias Deutsch said, and it's also relevant in terms of the last question that you received. You say that blue hydrogen will be and must be a transition technology, but Matthias Deutsch also asked, for how long will it be viable? What are your thoughts on that, Randi?
Yeah, so the transition period, how long it will be, it depends also how fast you will develop the green technology and how rapidly the prices go down on the wind and the electrolyzers. So, but I guess also you can achieve very high, you can achieve emission-free also with the fossil fuel, the blue, where you could capture 95% or higher from the reformer and store that. And you can also use biofuel to make the whole process emission-free in a way. So, but it's very hard to predict and say a certain specific period, because it's all very interlinked. So.
Okay. Before we move on to the next session, I would also like to touch upon the topic of framework conditions. Randi, you mentioned it in your presentation. You mentioned the carbon contracts for difference, the CO2, the guarantees of origins. Could all of you perhaps mention the key barrier for you when we take into account the ambitions and strategies that have already been set in place at the EU and national levels. So what's still remaining to be solved? Perhaps Torstein could start?
Yeah. What I've discovered the last half year, I guess, is import facilities need to be established in Germany. Kind of a barrier is how do we get it from the ship to shore to customer? I know there's activities going on, but just as today, it seems like a barrier. And industry say, well, it's good that you could get it to port, but how do we get it to us? And that's kind of a quick question for us, at least. We would also very much appreciate if there's coming European initiatives on the liquid hydrogen ship establishment. And definitely it's been mentioned carbon contract for difference. Yes, I think carbon contracts for difference are probably the main tool we can use to improve and increase on production facilities.
Are you there, Ms. Huang?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes, from our point of view, it's still the question how to bring the let's say the off-takers together, and how to, let's say, match this demand and production. So we are, I think, many people. Most of you have also known that different projects green hydrogen production projects are also established or being established in different countries and different regions, and how to bring them to the off-takers in Europe or in Germany especially, and how to, let's say, match this demand and production together. That's at least a question now we are facing with, and to identify the off-takers in Germany, for example, and to find out who is ready already today to pay for the green hydrogen, and that's something we need to work on. And of course, we'll need the policy will also need to encourage the off-takers to increase their readiness to use green hydrogen at the end.
Thank you. And Randi, I'll let you get the last word for today in this session.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I just repeat what I've been talking about, is that the key barriers is a systematic approach to hydrogen of all production technology, taking into account the CO2 footprint. And this also applies to conversion of natural gas pipeline to hydrogen pipeline, and also the transport of hydrogen. And as mentioned several times, the carbon contract for difference is also key, that it allows other technology than only green hydrogen. And also that, of course, applies to other funding mechanisms to kind of kick off the hydrogen economy. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, all three of you. We will now continue with further panel discussion. And Matthias Deutsch, you are back with us to answer some more questions. And we also have with us Ulf Eriksen from Statkraft. Statkraft is Europe's biggest provider of renewable energy and is present both in Germany and Norway. Ulf has been heading Statkraft's hydrogen team since 2019. His department is responsible for building Statkraft's position within renewable hydrogen, with a main focus on applications within industry and heavy-duty transportation. With us is also Dr. Jochen Wilkins, who has been managing director at ChemCoast since 1997. ChemCoast is an initiative to strengthen the locations of the most important industrial locations in northern Germany. So welcome all three of you.
Perhaps we should begin by introducing our two newest members in the panel. And we could begin on the production side with Ulf Eriksen from Statkraft. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about how hydrogen is a strategic business area for you, and what you see as the potential for production and application in Norway.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me to this session. So I have really been looking forward to it, and it's been good presentation so far. And I think my message in this session will also fill out what the others have been saying so far. Statkraft, as you mentioned, is the largest renewable power company in Europe. Last year we produced 61 terawatt hours of power, and 93% of that was renewable. We have a capacity of 20 gigawatts of our own production, but in addition we operate 28 gigawatts for others. And a large part of that operation is actually located in Germany and operates on German renewable assets. So this is our starting point for looking into hydrogen. Statkraft has 4 strategic pillars in our company. So first of all, we're coming from the hydropower position, as also Torstein and Agder Energi is doing. So we have a large hydropower fleet that we will maintain and develop, but the main expansion that we see is within wind and solar. Furthermore, we see that more business is possible to do within the customer area. And you didn't mention that in the introduction, but I actually used 20 years in Statkraft before, working with trading, origination and customer business. So I'm very happy that also customers have become an increasing part of Statkraft's focus. And also this is the case in Germany actually. And then the final pillar for Statkraft is to look for new business in the green shift. And I think the key driver for that business area is, of course, what happened in the Paris Agreement. And I think Dr. Matthias Deutsch was also into this at the start. I mean, reaching the targets of the Paris Agreement is not possible without the use of hydrogen. We should, of course, use direct electrification where possible. But in the hard-to-abate sectors like industry and some parts of heavy transport, it's not possible to do it without the use of hydrogen. And I think the same realization is what we see now across Europe, with 10 new strategies being launched only last year, where both Norway, Germany and the EU has their own strategies on hydrogen. And I think there are 2 sides to this story, right? It's the Paris Agreement emission reduction side of it, but it's also the building a new industry, which makes it really exciting. And last year, we participated in the work arranged by NHO, so the industrial organization in Norway, and they got help from McKinsey to look at what kind of potential could we have within green electricity value chains. And green hydrogen was lifted as one of the key areas within that analysis, with a potential of 7 to 20 billion euros per year of business by 2050. And with main areas within equipment, ammonia and maritime. And I think ammonia has already been touched upon by Torstein. I think this is one of the key areas where also Norway has a large potential. It links with maritime, but it also is a potential export vessel for hydrogen. And the roadmap said that you should build a national industry and a national home market first, and then expand. And when it comes to potential, as you asked for, we see 1 to 1.5 gigawatt by 2030 and maybe up to 3 gigawatts in the mid-30s, where ammonia is quite a substantial part of it. As Torstein mentioned, maybe 2 to 3 gigawatts is going into ammonia production alone for shipping and green ammonia for fertilizer, and also export of hydrogen potentially to Germany. So we are engaged in some key projects to look at these specific sectors. And like Dr. Deutsch, we also think that starting off with some of the key industrial sectors are key to succeed here. So we work with green ammonia in Finnmark. We work with green methanol, very interesting project with carbon capture and utilization in Finnfjord, Troms. We're working on green steel in Mo i Rana and also a large green ammonia project in southern parts of Norway, together with partners Yara and Aker. And I think we also started to look at potential opportunities within Germany. And I'm really looking forward to getting to learn more of the opportunities that we can see now together in this discussion today, because we see that there are lots of opportunity for Norway to also contribute with the hydrogen to Germany. There are some of challenges, of course, but I think we can get back to the challenges in the discussion. So I think I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Ulf. And Jochen Wilkins, ChemCoast is on the end consumer side. I would also like you to give us a short introduction to your organization, to your members, and also to the hydrogen needs and how you see that developing in the time ahead.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. First of all, I want to say that we have an outstanding situation now. Industry, NGOs, and politics agreed the way to climate neutrality. There's an agreement between all of them. The one would have faster than the others, but the way is the same. That's a situation we never had in my working life in the past 33 years. So it's a wonderful time now. And what we see now in the discussion is that we are looking in the same future as nature made us before millions of years. Nature is building up molecules from hydrogen and carbon dioxide. And Ulf Eriksen has energy, hydrogen energy, not only producing, but also in its own body, because hydrogen is the energy center of Ulf Eriksen. Yeah, so it's a great molecule we have, hydrogen. And so, what is about ChemCoast? ChemCoast, most of the people thinking in Germany when thinking about chemical industry, about North Rhine-Westphalia and BASF and in Rheinland-Pfalz and some other places, but not on northern Germany. So what was our aim in 1997? It was the situation that we saw that we are in a great competition with other areas in the world. And what we like to show is how can we get together in northern Germany competitive for the future. And one of the first projects was to implement an ethylene pipeline grid, and we implemented it between Brunsbüttel, Stade, and Sachsen-Anhalt. So the next idea was there is a challenge in the future because we have enough wind energy in northern Germany, but we have no grids. We have no enough grids to North Rhine-Westphalia. So what can we do with the surplus of energy in North Germany? The idea in 2012 was to make hydrogen from it, because in the Hamburg area, greater Hamburg area, we need about 50,000 tons hydrogen in 2012. 50,000 tons. It would be great to have it green. And what does it make when it is green? And we showed that we will have an increase of hydrogen demand to 2025 to 100,000 tons. So there is a great push, and what we see was that's a great challenge for us in northern Germany to make it real. But there were some obstacles, as we know. The main issue for hydrogen is to have cheap energy and electricity. Cheap electricity. And Germany is not the place for cheap electricity. So that's an obstacle. So we saw that is a great challenge we have to work with the politics. And now the politics in Germany and in the European Union see that we can have a future with hydrogen. And what we are thinking about now is how to implement the infrastructure. When I have discussions with Greens in northern Germany to Autobahn development, yeah, they say don't build an Autobahn because there will be more cars on the way afterwards. Thinking about that, having a pipeline will produce more demand on hydrogen. So that's what we are trying to get to the politicians to understand that we first have to have the infrastructure, harbor infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure. And there was just a new study from Schleswig-Holstein about the position of Schleswig-Holstein in this area. And they also had a look on the prices for import of hydrogen. And it was not surprising for me, but Scandinavia is one of the cheapest deliverer for green hydrogen. So the question is, Norway is one of the biggest supplier of gas for Germany, and we have it in Emden, for example, yeah. And why is Norway not in future one of the big supplier of green hydrogen for Germany? And then we have to look how to get it from Norway to Germany and from Germany to Northern Westphalia. And that's the challenge we are working now with some gas grid owners to have a pipeline from Northern Westphalia to Schleswig-Holstein. And that's the issue we are working now on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Jochen Wilkins. You mentioned the natural gas that Norway has and the possibilities of export from Norway to Germany. And I believe there was a question in the audience regarding that.
Let me see. I think we can...
Regarding the blue hydrogen.
Yes, this was a question for Matthias Deutsch. On the blue hydrogen. We all know that blue hydrogen is a very much debated topic in Germany. And do you see a change in the perception and attitude towards blue hydrogen in German politics today?
I think there needs to be a good reason why we would use it. And that makes it so important why I introduced the word uncontroversial. If you can show that there's uncontroversial demand for molecules, and here again I'm stressing feedstock and chemical reactants, which is very much different from high temperature process heat, because that's much more up to debate where we can electrify first. Look at BASF. I mean, so look at the consensus first. The more you have a consensus, that's one aspect, where it's extremely hard to decarbonize without molecules, the easier you are in the technical field. Then the second question is, why so much speed? Well, just saying Paris is one thing, but the other thing is really industrial policy, keeping a climate, an industry in Germany and in Europe overall that can actually keep up with the speed of moving towards climate neutrality in production and processes and in the assets you need to have ready. Then my colleagues who work more in industry tell me, well, a lot of assets, in particular in Germany, need very much scrutinized how we can make them, and this applies in particular to steel, make it ready to keep up the speed with what's going on in Asia. Because in the end, and that you can also see that with Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden, I think, said something like, when I hear climate, I hear jobs. Or when I say climate, whatever. But the question is, can we be fast enough for decarbonizing industry? And this needs to be clearly distinguished from all the other discussions around, oh, am I allowed to use this precious molecule, which comes with many energy losses when starting with electricity? Can I use this precious molecule for bulk use in passenger cars or low temperature building heat? I think this is the misleading question, and it drives us away from the consensus and the core question about industrial competitiveness globally, preparing our industries for climate neutrality. If we understand this, then you get much closer to the answer, okay, can I win over people for this argument from different political spheres and the NGOs and the public, because in the long run, you see this both in the European strategy and in the German strategy. I'm not saying every member state, but for several member states, you see this idea in the long run will be green. And I mean, you see our cost analysis, and is long run 2050? Is there some years more or less, or 2045? Still to be seen, also defined by economics. But, and that's what I would like to add, because I heard something from Randi on climate neutrality of blue hydrogen. In the end, there's two aspects. There's the one part that cannot be abated, and you said maybe we use biofuels. Well, we have a pretty clear opinion on biofuels. Sustainable biofuels are scarce on this planet, and in our study on the climate neutral Germany, we have a very dedicated use for biofuels, which is organizing negative emissions in the long run. Maybe that was essentially what you were saying. The question is, can we afford kind of a limitless amount of negative emissions just to compensate the last 5 or 10% residual emissions from blue hydrogen? Not sure about that, how long we want to do this, because in the end, negative emissions are expensive, be it a biofuel CCS or a direct air capture CCS. It's probably bound to be a rather expensive technology in the long run. There will be learning. Final thought here is that thinking about residual emissions from blue also has some kind of upstream fugitive emissions involved. We know that globally, our societies have not managed so far to keep fugitive emissions in a range that is kind of negligible. The total volumes are too large, and there's a large global climate impact of methane. And so therefore, if we move away from methane in the long run, this is extremely beneficial for global warming potential. And all those things together show a clear path away from blue rather faster. Final argument, if you get into discussions with rather, let's say, NGO side, there's a clear economics question. And given a limited budget, ceteris paribus, you can spend your €1 only once, not twice. Do you spend it on long-run blue investments or green hydrogen investments? You can spend it only once. And there is a pure economic trade-off in this question. If you look at it from a budget, a limited budget, a policymaker's question, if you put now public funding into stimulating all this, and I'm not saying we're against this, I'm just making the big picture, producing the big picture for you. This spending question, do I spend my taxpayers' money on incentivizing this or that? You need to have really strong arguments what you want to use your hydrogen for. Therefore, we are trying to build consensus. If you're deviating from this, you can't organize taxpayers' money for blue hydrogen for a limited time and difficult investments. I think this is the big picture from my perspective.
Matthias, and I see Jochen has a comment here.
Yes, thank you, Matthias Deutsch, for this nice picture. Because when we have a story like we are making chemicals, paints as coatings and adhesives and something like that, from carbon dioxide and hydrogen, maybe, yeah? Then we can, if we could build up this picture, I think we will have a chance in the discussion. And we need carbon as a source in future. But what are the carbon sources in future? The recycling of plastics, okay. But is it enough? I don't know. So we need a carbon source, and the first projects in northern Germany here in Dow study is to make from CO2 and hydrogen from the electrolyzers methanol as a first step, to show that is a business advantage also for this company in the future. So first we need stories, and we have to prove that it's a good story. And in the meantime, in Germany, it's very difficult in this discussion, but I think we are on a good way. And so the competitiveness, you said, Matthias Deutsch, we have to speed up. Yes. Sinopec announced, Sinopec, one of the biggest petrochemical companies in China, Sinopec announced they want to be the biggest producer for green hydrogen in the world. That means we have to speed up.
That's a good catchphrase. Ulf Eriksen, do you want to say anything here, or?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I could just a very quick comment. I think it's interesting. I share the view that Randi has that you will probably need both. We believe that you will start with the green building the market in smaller scale, and then when the volume takes off, then you would need blue in a period. And of course, there is potentially a challenge that Matthias Deutsch is mentioning, and it comes to the cost competitiveness and what you will want in the end. I think Bloomberg just published an analysis where they quoted as the sort of summary of this number of countries where blue will be cost competitive with green, and the number was 0. And that was by 2030 already. So there is, of course, a challenge on the cost side, but I think volume-wise, it will be difficult to meet the demand with only green, at least for a period of time. Yeah, but you could revert to the other questions.
And just really swiftly, Matthias Deutsch and Jochen Wilkins, what are your thoughts on how the new target for 2045 with net zero will affect the hydrogen strategy in Germany and the election coming in September? Just really swiftly.
I could, but so as I said, as it happens, we have published our scenario for climate neutral Germany 2045 like 1-2 weeks before the government came up with this idea, and there are some differences between the two ideas how to reach climate neutrality 2045. But in our study, we have like 20 terawatt hours green hydrogen produced in Germany by 2030 and like 40 imported by 2030. But when you're asking about the German strategy is of course mainly about deploying electrolysis in Germany. And that's, I think, still up to discussion. Maybe I'm not sure whether we'll see updates before the elections, but at least it's under discussion whether the 5 gigawatts of electrolysis installed by 2030 is the right way to go and the right ambition for 2030. In our study, we have like 10 gigawatts installed by 2030, but the key question is, okay, how do you organize your electricity system in a meaningful way? Because in one of our studies, we made this very simple because we just said, okay, you just connect your electrolyzer to a renewable source. Well, reality, of course, is way more complicated. You want to have kind of grid connections, at least most players want that. And then the question is it rather 2,000 or rather 4,000, or if you can organize that, 8,000 full load hours? And just let me add this one thought. The big discussion as I see it, because that's what I picked up from the prior presentations here, is I think Norway is in a unique position. With 8,000 full load hours. However, the big discussion, and that spans, I think, the broader political spectrum, including NGOs in Germany, and is the concern about how do we make sure that molecules that we add to our economies, green molecules, don't use precious green electricity that's then missing somewhere else in the system. I mean, that's the key question. Is this a zero-sum game? And then there are many reasons, and that's under the term of additionality. And there are many problems around this. But the key question is, are we just shifting this green property from one, let's say, element to the other, from electrons to molecules? Then somebody is happy because he sold it, he got a PPA, or he bought it, he got a PPA, he can prove there's a guarantee of origin, everything. And somebody else is then using coal power to feed the rest of the needs of the system. That's one of the core, I think, controversies. And as far as I understand it, I'm not by no means a deep expert, I think 8,000 full load hours from Norway are part of this controversy, because the question is, did you actually construct a new hydro plant for that, or are you stressing the fact that you have existing plants? And what is then your contribution to the overall decarbonization of Europe? That, I think, is at the core what I see between the German, European, and Norway discussion, which is, I think, very important to move on. Because the more, and then I stop, sorry for speaking long, but the more you can organize additional renewables, maybe floating offshore, whatever you have to offer, the easier it will be to engage into this discussion. And maybe that you can't yield 8,000 hours then, but come on, 4,000 or 5,000 hours, whatever you can offer is still good. And it's better than maybe 2,000 hours, maybe on average the German system might be offering. And so let's move in that direction. I think that's very important.
Thanks a lot, Matthias. And I believe that's the last we get from you today. We have to round off.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this very interesting discussion on the bilateral business opportunities in the hydrogen value chain. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to our partners, Equinor, Statkraft, Agder Energi, DNV, RWE Renewables, Hydro, Statnett, and Tennet. There is still time to sign up for the next webinar in this webinar series, which will take place on Wednesday next week on the topic of setting the framework for achieving net zero emissions. You find all the webinars at German-Norwegian.energy. And by that, it is time to say thank you yet again and ha det bra.
And auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Danke schön.